Final Fantasy XIV to me is a proof that the right leadership, a little bit of luck, anything is possible. So what do I mean by this? Well, the story behind Final Fantasy XIV came to be is really an interesting one. Other YouTubers might have covered this already, but they had an incredibly rocky development cycle. Let me do a quick recap on how it all went down. And just in case you want a quick TLDR, Final Fantasy XIV is an amazing game in 2022, but I think it's important you know how this came to be. So, Final Fantasy XIV, the original version that is, was released in 2010, and by all means it should have been a huge success right then and there. After all, Final Fantasy is probably the most well-known RPG franchise to have ever existed, with all the games in the series featuring huge worlds, rich stories, and amazing music. Square Enix, the company behind all modern Final Fantasy titles, has already experienced success in the MMO space when they developed and released Final Fantasy XI. So it's not like they were starting out completely from scratch. In case you aren't familiar with this game series, Final Fantasy XI and XIV were the only Final Fantasy games that were subscription-based MMO RPGs. All other mainland Final Fantasy titles were strictly single-player RPGs. Final Fantasy XI was developed for the PlayStation 2 in 2002. It was a pretty big success for its time. When it came to create a new MMO experience for systems other than the PS2, Square Enix decided to hire a majority of the same people that worked on Final Fantasy XI to work on Final Fantasy XIV. Surely, if they can make a good MMO once, they could definitely do it again, right? Well, not exactly. See, when the team got to work on Final Fantasy XIV, they included many of the same elements that worked in Final Fantasy XI, although many of these systems simply did not work in a new game. They were attempting to create a Japanese-style MMO for a world that had come to experience more from the MMORPG experience, and the 8 years that had passed since Final Fantasy XI had come out. Many players expressed frustration with the tedium and strangeness of lots of parts of Final Fantasy XIV when it first got released, such as the lack of ability to jump, the slow and intuitive menus, the awful world map that made it easier for players to get lost than it did for them to find anything of meaning. The list just goes on and on from there. So at this point, many developers would have just left the project and declared a failure, but not Square Enix. It took nearly 3 years, yes 3 years, after the original launch, but in 2013, Square Enix finally re-released Final Fantasy XIV, this time branding it with the subtitle A Realm Reborn. This was their last-ditch effort to reshape the game into something that the players would really like. And the craziest thing happened. People actually loved it. This was all thanks to Square Enix being able to admit that they made mistakes and being able to completely demolish the foundation of the old game and essentially rebuild it from scratch. They hired Naoki Yoshida, known by many fans as Yoshi P, to direct the new project, and he took a lot of inspiration from modern MMOs that were enjoyable in the modern age. This was all happening while the original Final Fantasy XIV was being played by subscribers, but when the new version actually dropped, it took the form of a meteor in the sky that literally crashed down into the planet and destroyed the old version of the game. Yes, you could probably watch some videos on what that looks like. This is an event known in-game known as the 7th Umbral Calamity. The rewriting of the world's rules and logic was cleverly written into the game's lore, and what happened on that day significantly impacted the entire world of Eorzea, the world that Final Fantasy XIV takes place in. It's since been about 9 years since that re-release happened, and a lot has changed for the better. The product we clearly have today is one that, in my honest opinion, you absolutely cannot miss. Having experienced all the in-game content throughout all of the released expansions, the conclusion of the main story is quite possibly the most satisfied I've ever been with the ending of anything in any piece of media. Like I said, something you don't want to miss out in. So I came to know so many lovable characters along the way. Characters development is really satisfying. Some people tragically die, some people change sides, and others do just surprising things that I don't obviously want to spoil that you could just never expect it. Everything just comes together so perfectly, from the presentation to the amazing music to the in-game events. I can't even begin to describe how worth it this whole experience has been for me, especially if you're coming from something like World of Warcraft. So I personally think the game's story and writing is the strongest selling point. The gameplay itself is a lot of fun, and it features a unique class system that lets you switch classes basically whenever you want. which is an awesome way to make sure you get to experience as much as possible on a single character without having to make multiple alts, multiple different characters as well. So my personal favorite class might be the summoner. Honestly, just about every class is a ton of fun with lots of variety. It makes it really hard for me to pick a favorite. Again, I love all the new classes. They're always going to be coming out with new ones, and I can hope to only wish the new ones that are coming out. So if this looks interesting, I just need to offer you one warning before you start. Be prepared for a slow start. A lot has improved since 2013 with the new expansion, but the base game still has lots of catching up to do. As a result, the story can be a bit slower to newer players, but like I said, definitely worth it. Developers have put in a lot of work to try and streamline the experience. Honestly, much of what you experience is so important for building the foundation that I don't personally have a problem with it. Obviously, like I said, you just have to commit a fair amount of time. I would strongly recommend against skipping the story and trying to rest to the end game. Final Fantasy XIV is absolutely a case where the true joy of the game is in the journey, not in the destination. So don't be in a rush and just be happy to soak it all in while it lasts. Anyways, this probably goes without saying, but Final Fantasy XIV is expected to continue thriving and improving on just about everything in the coming future. It's just one of the biggest and most successful MMOs currently today, with players still joining by the truckload. And even though the main story is concluded, we've been told by the developers that a new story will be taking place soon in the game's coming expansions. And I personally cannot wait for what the future has in store for Final Fantasy XIV and all the different characters that we met throughout the journey. So what do you guys think about Final Fantasy XIV? I sort of skimmed the surface of the game, what it came to be. I decided to include it in this video, so for the sake of time I have to trim down some of the content. That's just so much fun to do in this game, from housing to PvP to obviously the story. Just definitely check it out. So do me a favor and tell me what your favorite thing to do in Final Fantasy XIV is down in the comments below. And if you guys haven't tried it, there's definitely ways to jump in without having to pay. They have a free trial up until the first expansion. So definitely awesome, definitely a great time to join. So let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys next time.